What is up, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you hear like a little humming noise in the background, just know it is my heater. Where I live, it's very, very cold. And today we are going to be finishing off the Sandra Levy case with the trial, the sentencing, and of course, the lasting effect that Chandra's case has had on the world. This will be my last video for a couple weeks because I have a whole nother case I'm working on that is a lot of information, and it's about Sandra Bland. It's my first case for a police brutality case, and it's also going to be the first case I do for somebody who really deserves the justice. So yeah, so with the trial, let's get right into this video. We're talking about the trial of Guandique. So the trial started on October 18th of 2010, and the Supreme Court commenced Judge Gerald I. Fisher and Assistant U.S. Attorney Fernando Campomor Sanchez to present the names of potential witnesses for the trial. These witnesses included FBI agent Brad Garrett and the two women Guandique assaulted in the same park Chandra's body was found. At the start of the trial, the prosecution's case was expected to take about 4 weeks, and the defense was to last a day. On October 25th and 26th of 2010, Hallie Schilling and Christy Wiegand, who were the two women that Guandique had assaulted, were to testify about being attacked by Guandique while jogging in Rock Creek Park. I couldn't find Hallie Schilling's account of it, but Christy Wiegand recounted that Guandique grabbed her from behind, dragged her down a ravine, and held a knife against her face. So on the 26th, Robert Levy, who is now 64 years old, took the stand and refuted statements about his past suspicions on Gary Condit. He also testified that he told authorities during the early years of the investigation that his daughter would have been too cautious to jog alone in the woods, but said that he no longer believed this to be true. He said that he told police that his daughter and Gary Condit had a 5-year plan between them to get married. So they had a 5-year plan, and at the end of this plan, they were going to get married. Robert Levy also admitted, "I just said whatever came to mind, just point to him as the villain." Robert also added that he had been convinced that Gary Condit was guilty until we learned about this character here. He was talking about Guandique. November 1st, Gary Condit testified at the trial and was asked on at least 3 occasions if he and Chandra had been involved in a sexual relationship. His response was, "I am not going to respond to that question, out of privacy for myself and Chandra." An FBI biologist testified that semen found on underwear from Chandra's apartment contained sperm matching Gary Condit's profile. Let's break down all that we know so far. The two women that Guandique assaulted back in 2001 in the same park that Chandra's body was found in testified. Robert Levy testified saying he no longer thought it was Gary Condit, and that it was Guandique, and it was proven that Gary Condit and Chandra Levy had a sexual relationship by DNA matching Gary. Prosecution brought a witness forward, and his name was Armando Morales. He shared a cell with Guandique, and he testified that Guandique was concerned about being transferred between 2 prisons in 2006 because of inmate violence against suspected rapist, which Guandique was. Armando stated that Guandique, a fellow member of the, I want to put it on the screen because I do not know how to pronounce it, gang, confided to him that he had killed Chandra while trying to rob her, but said that he did not rape her. The prosecution rested their case on November 10th of 2010 while dropping 2 out of the 6 charges against Guandique. On November 15th, just 5 days later, the defense rested its case without calling Guandique to stand. Other prison witnesses called by the defense refuted Armando Morales' testimony. Jose Manuel Alaniz said that Guandique made no mention of rape or murder while sharing a cell with both him and Morales at the penitentiary in Kentucky. Jose admitted under cross-examination that he didn't want to be too nosy and was often asleep at the prison while recovering from a gunshot wound. prosecution dropped 2 more charges because the statute of limitations have passed. So we know that Guandique is a part of a gang. He confided to his cellmate that he had killed Chandra while trying to rob her, but he did not rape her. 2 of his charges were dropped, or 4 of his charges were dropped in total, and yeah. During closing arguments for the remaining charges, or the first-degree murder committed during a kidnapping and robbery, prosecutor Amanda Haynes contended that Guandique bound and gagged Chandra after attacking her, leaving her to die of dehydration or exposure in the park. Defense attorney Santha Sonnenberg countered with the lack of DNA evidence connecting Guandique to the crime scene, calling the prosecution's case fiction. Santha suggested that Chandra had been murdered elsewhere, with her dead body being dumped in the park. So, the defense is saying that Guandique couldn't have done it. Somebody else murdered her and moved her body, which I don't think there were any signs of that. The jury began deliberations on November 17th of 2010. Scheduled proceedings of the case met delays because of increased security at the courthouse. After 2 days of deliberations, all but 1 juror had voted to convict Guandique. On the 3rd day, the jury asked Judge Gerald Fisher to clarify the definition of assault. He responded that any physical injury could be legally considered assault regardless of how small. On November 22nd of 2010, the jury found Guandique guilty of both remaining counts of first-degree murder. After the trial, a juror said the testimony of Morales, which is Armando, was decisive in reaching the verdict. So his testimony was really helpful in deciding the verdict. The conviction was called a miracle for having been reached with only circumstantial evidence. Gladys Witherspoon, who had previously represented Guandique in the 2001 assault cases on the 2 women, stated that she was troubled by the jury's verdict. She said, "I just think they were going to convict anyway. They felt bad for that woman, the mom. She's sitting in there every day." She was talking about Susan Levy. At a post-trial press conference, Susan said, "There's always going to be a feeling of sadness. I can surely tell you, it ain't closure." Since the trial ended, Susan has acted to keep photographic evidence of Chandra's remains sealed from the news media, which I think any good mother would have done that, to make sure that their daughter's remains and how she was found is never seen. So we're moving on to his sentencing and his appeals and what it was like for this. On February 1st of 2011, Guandique's attorney requested a new trial on the grounds that the verdict had been improperly obtained. The 11-page file claimed that the prosecutors had appealed to the motions of the jury. The motion also alleged that 1 juror, who did not take notes, had breached the judge's instructions not to be influenced by other jurors' notes. The prosecution opposed a retrial, arguing that the issue regarding the notes was no more than a technicality that did not have a significant effect on the verdict. Guandique faced a minimum penalty of 30 years to a maximum life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. While they were seeking the maximum sentence, the prosecutor stated that Guandique is unable to control himself and thus will remain a danger to women. A memo submitted by the prosecution in February of 2011 cited that Guandique was harassing female staff in prison. He had solicited a nurse and masturbated in front of female guards. That is, in my opinion, disgusting, and he definitely should somewhat get punishment for that, because no woman deserves to be treated like that. Assistant U.S. Attorney Fernando Campor Sanchez disclosed that he had traveled to El Salvador with a detective to investigate allegations that Guandique had fled his native country because of suspected attacks against local women dating back to 1999. What's funny is when I was writing that, I almost wrote 1991, and I was like, I don't think he was doing it then, but during the sentencing hearing on February 11th of 2011, Guandique said to Chandra's family, he said this to his supposed victim's family, "I am sorry for what happened to your daughter." He then went on to profess his innocence before the judge could remind Suzanne Levy, to address the court instead of the defendant, Susan turned to him and said, "Did you really take her life? Look me in the eyes and tell me." The judge denied Guandique's motion for retrial and handed down a sentence of 60 years in prison, stated that Guandique will be a danger for some time. He's a sexual predator. Sorry, I just shook the camera because I moved my leg. Guandique repeated his innocence during his sentencing and has maintained his innocence since. On February 25th of 2011, public defender James Klein filed an appeal of Guandique's conviction with the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. According to the court's annual report, appeals take an average of 588 days to reach a resolution. In December of 2012 and 2013, or in January of 2013, a set of secret hearings were made known to the public, but the subject of the meetings was sealed by a judge. A third hearing in February, the judge in the case unsealed the transcripts from the previous hearings, which revealed that Klein was seeking a new trial based on new evidence in the case. A fourth hearing was scheduled for April of 2013. So now we're jumping in a couple years. Now moving on from 2013, we are moving to 2015. On May 22nd of 2015, prosecutors dropped their opposition to a new trial. This came due to defense claims that the prosecution's star witness, Armando Morales, had perjured himself, which means that he had basically made himself deceptive, made himself lie, while he was on the witness stand. The defense said that the prosecutors had also failed to disclose that Armando was a jailhouse informant with a reputation for being untrustworthy. Armando had denied ever being an informant. The defense also argued that he had made up Guandique's confession in order to boot his stock with prosecutors. On June 3rd of 2015, the defense said a new witness, a neighbor of Chandra Levy's, called 911 at 4:37 in the morning on the last day Chandra was alive to report hearing a blood-curdling scream, possibly coming from Chandra's apartment. On June 4th of 2015, Judge Gerald Fisher granted a motion for the new trial. Guandique's attorney suggested that Armando fabricated Guandique's confession to gain favor with law enforcement. On June 12th, Judge Robert E. Morin, set the retrial for March 1st, 2016, but in that March, the trial was moved to October 11th. So, we're going back to 2015. In November of that year, prosecutors actually told a D.C. Superior Court judge that their office failed to turn over documents to the defense before the defendant's first trial, so Guandique's first trial. In December of 2015, just a month later, defense attorneys argued in new court filings that the charges would be dismissed because of procedural errors, which means that they didn't give the papers over and it was their fault. Now, jumping back into 2016, on July 28th of that year, prosecutors announced that they would not proceed with the case against Guandique and would instead seek to have him deported and face El Salvador's rules. According to the Washington Post, prosecutors lost confidence in the case after learning that Armando, who now lived in Maryland after getting off prison, was secretly recorded admitting he lied on the witness stand during the trial. Babs Prowler, who a lot of people know, she's actually famous, the woman who made the recording, turned it over to the police. The U.S. Attorney's Office only stated that, based on new information that had come to light during the previous week, there was no longer enough evidence to go forward with the retrial. So, as we can see, that every time they tried for a retrial, or even got a retrial, it didn't go any farther than he was still sentenced to the 60 years in prison. And the final one, we see that the prosecutors decided not to have a retrial, but instead deport him back to El Salvador, which means that he would not only be facing the 60 years in prison here, he would also be facing the charges of attacking women in El Salvador. Now, Chandra's death had a lasting impact here in America, due in part to efforts of her friends and family. Chandra's disappearance came after a number of other high-profile cases that led to the creation resources for missing adults. So her disappearance helped create resources that helped with missing adults and making sure that they were fine and okay. But that is basically the end of Chandra Levy's case. Her murderer, or her supposed murderer, was caught. We find out that her and Gary Condit weren't having a sexual relationship. They had a 5-year plan to get married. Do I still believe that Gwandike did it? I do not know. And I will continue to say that until there's actual hard evidence. But it's been 20 years since Chandra's disappearance, and 19 years since her body was found. So I genuinely think that he could have murdered her. It could have been an attempted robbery, and it just not went right and not went how he planned it. But I don't know, and yeah. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this little 3-part series on Chandra Levy, and I hope you guys enjoy the next 3 to 4 part series I have on Sandra Bland. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. So peace. Remember, always keep fighting.